Welcome to the Pastors Podcast. This is Pastor Scott, and with me today are Pastors Reggie.
Hello.
Pastor Reggie and his wife Nicole.
Hello.
Nicole Austin. You guys know who they are. Such a pleasure to be with you guys, and excited to just to get to dive in a little bit today. Today we're going to be talking about how to talk about race and ethnicity and identity with our children. I mean, this is just such a ubiquitous topic, right? This is a topic that is everywhere right now, and every organization, every company is talking about it. Every school is talking about it. And I think for a lot of that reminds us, number one, of the importance of us instructing and raising up our kids, helping to give them a biblical worldview as they grow up in the world around us. And it also provides a unique opportunity to talk about these things, to talk about the nature of race and ethnicity. And I know that none of us have the perfect answers, right?
Speak
to that.
For yourself, Scott.
We know everything.
I haven't even started yet.
Just setting the bar. Just setting the bar. But I wanted to have this conversation with you for a few different reasons, but particularly I think this is a unique topic, not only as we share with our children about our own races and ethnicities, but it's especially unique for a biracial couple, right? Which we have a lot in our church family as you're navigating that together. So let me just ask this. We'll start out here. We'll ask ignorant question. Is biracial the right term?
It's funny. I actually think that biracial is there's no way this is going to offend anybody term.
Okay.
But and
maybe that's why it came to my mind.
Nothing wrong with it. But I remember, I mean, so much of this is what you grew up with, what you're used to, and things change and evolve over time. Like when I was a kid, people used to say mixed. Like, you're a mixed kid. And there's and I think that still holds somewhat today. I don't think that that's offensive anymore. I mean, there's even a show on TV right now called Mixed-ish. Yeah. It's based off the show Blackish. So someone being a mixed kid, like that still is a term.
But I think there are some people who actually don't like that term.
True.
Like, I think to your point, biracial or multiracial or multi-ethnic is the best way to kind of describe it in a way that, to your point, won't offend anybody. Hopefully.
You're guaranteed to not offend anybody, I think, if you say biracial.
Well, it was even interesting to me. I was thinking about biracial. Like, biracial also assumes there's only two.
Yeah.
True.
Right?
True.
Like, and oftentimes there's all sorts of ethnic, makeup of each one of us.
I mean, most of us are mutts in some way.
Yeah. By
ourselves, forget about who we marry and who we then have children with.
Totally. So I think, maybe just start here. Do you guys talk about race and ethnicity with your kids? And in general, like, is that a regular conversation? Is that a, rare conversation? What does that look like in your home?
It's never come up. We've never discussed it.
Well, I'm so glad I invited you.
This was a huge mistake.
We're such experts. No, I mean, absolutely. And I think that it ends up being something that obviously comes up in our family more than it would come up in a family if the parents looked exactly the same and came from the same background. But I also think it comes up because of our world, and it comes up because of the community in which we live, where we have people of all different ethnicities. But we definitely talk about, I think that one of the things I've been thinking about a lot as all this has been happening with the things that have been going on in the world right now is that I have a lot of friends who are like, oh my gosh, we've got to talk to our kids about race. And sure. And if you never have, absolutely, that's a conversation you want to have going. But the way that I keep thinking about it is I keep thinking about it in terms of like how you talk to your kids about sex. Because with sex, like, it's not you have the one
conversation,
and then that's it, and you cover all the stuff and the end, right? It's more that you kind of gauge the age and the stage your kid is at. You talk to them about the things that make sense for a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old, which happen to be the ages of our kids, in a way that makes sense to them. And then you kind of let them know, like, hey, this is a topic we feel comfortable talking about. We're not squeamish about it. This is something that we are knowledgeable about and we know things about, and we can be a resource for you. And we're here whenever you want to talk about it, and kind of let that be sort of a baseline, and then go from there as things come up, either in the world that we want to talk to them about, or if they experience something or see something or learn about something at school. That's kind of how I've been thinking about it lately.
And I think that it's I think that's a really good analogy. You want to be more, I feel like because comparing it to sex, like the sex thing you want to be more proactive about because it's going to come and hit you. But the race thing, while you can be proactive with it as well, sometimes I feel like it is somewhat reactive, only in the sense of your child will ask you a question, or something will happen in the news, or because that you sort of rely on that stimulus some of the time, which I think kind of makes sense, as opposed to for us being an interracial couple, like to have kids, it's Thursday, it's time to talk about race, like that's not what we do in our family, but as things come up, we want to make sure that we are giving them tools, ways to see and understand that are age appropriate.
And I think that Reg and I were laughing because we were talking about this the other day, and we were remembering that our oldest daughter is 11 now, and when she was, I don't know, how old was she? Like, she was maybe 5 or 6, and it was when she
7.
was first starting to realize, like, wait, Daddy's skin is a different color than yours, Mommy. Like, what's that all about? And I don't know, it was the first time we'd ever really kind of explained like what it meant that she was biracial, and that was great. And then Reg, I think, was just like so excited that the topic was sort of like open now.
And I went down a rabbit hole. Like, she asked a super simple question, and I got into it. I was like, there's slavery, there's Reconstruction, there's segregation, and there's Jim Crow, and I was going through it again. 6.
And I'm sitting there
6
like,
years old, and it was
honey,
like, okay. Those are good things. Talk about those, but she's 6. Like, her eyes glazed over like minutes, like a while ago.
Yeah. And then afterwards we were like, Reg was like, I think I maybe went a little too far. And I was like, listen, those are all good conversations for us to have with her, but maybe not quite yet. And so I think that that's, in terms of like when and how you talk to your kids, I think that's just partly it's knowing your own kid, partly it's just being cognizant of where they are and what they really need to know at that point.
Yeah, so I mean, how has that, for each of you, how have you talked to your kids, or even maybe shared with them your racial identity, your ethnic identity, whether that's Black or Jamaican? I don't know, like what that, how that engages, or whether it's being Jewish. Like, what is that? Yeah, I don't know. What are some maybe snapshots of what that's looked like, kind of beyond the first one at 6?
I think that it kind of, that's a perfect word, is snapshots, because I think it's taking opportunities, somewhat regular opportunities as they come up, to just throw out this little thing. And I feel like little things, and I feel like they express themselves differently depending on the occasion, because sometimes it's through food. And through what we eat. Sometimes it's through just even going through some sort of like family tree or something, like, this is your mom, this is a picture of your mom's mom, and she was born here, and just going through things in that way, or just general conversations. I think I think the problem is there's so much richness and variety amidst all races that, like, to sort of distill Black is difficult. Because I don't want, like, my kids have a certain heritage that will not be the same heritage of other Black people that they know. Like you mentioned, like my family is predominantly Caribbean. My mom was born and raised in Jamaica. My dad was born here, but his family's from Barbados. I've got cousins up the wazoo and family in Jamaica and Barbados, and just like, for me, it's very Caribbean, West Indian based. Personal history and heritage, as opposed to, I know that John Moss, for example, I believe it was his grandfather was a sharecropper, like in the South. His family is from Mississippi. That's not my personal story. It's the Black story. It's the story of African Americans in general in this country, but that's not my own specific one. So it's conveying to my kids both of those things. My specific heritage in terms of being Caribbean American, as well as the larger heritage of being what it is to be Black in America. And I think both of those are important and valuable.
Man, I really appreciate that, because I appreciate the importance of conveying both.
Yeah.
Right? And conveying how your racial identity is made up of both, in a sense, right? It's at least I'm assuming that. I don't want to project that on you. But I think there's your experience is contextualized in a larger story, right? That you're part. But it's also individual, right? It's also there's also individual and personal heritages that tell their own unique story within that broader story.
Yeah. I think Reg also, a lot of the some of the stuff that he's communicated to our kids about his heritage or about Blackness in America is actually also through music. So I think a lot of the music that Reg listens to and therefore plays for the kids and that they hear has some of that as well. But again, so much of this is you're figuring out as you go. Like for Reg and I, it's been important for us to communicate all of this to our kids in ways that make sense. And so, like the first Martin Luther King Day that the kids were old enough to really have any sense, I was like, we've got to do something. What do we do? And I'm like looking up on Pinterest and finding crafts. And so we did a craft. And then the next year the kids were like, what craft are we going to do for Martin Luther King Day this year? And I was like, this is now a tradition. And it's great. And it is. We do something every year. And it is a way to talk about him and his legacy. And it's become a thing that we do. But it kind of came about organically.
Yeah.
And then there's this Juneteenth just happened. And everyone's like, and we've never celebrated. It's never been a thing that we've done as a family. For either of us. And so suddenly we're like, oh, should we be doing this? What should we do? And let's think about, is this something we're going to incorporate where we didn't have something before?
Yeah.
And then to answer your actual question about kind of how the kids, how I communicate to them their Jewishness, because as their mother and I'm Jewish, they are Jewish. Especially as somebody who's a believer in Jesus, which adds sort of an extra wrinkle to it. I want them to understand what being Jewish means to me, and so therefore, to some extent, what it's going to mean to them. And to Reg's point, a lot of it is food based. So, we definitely we just left them eating lox and bagels right now. So that's definitely a big part of something that resonates for me. But then also we do some Jewish holidays, and so those are important. Passover, which has resonance for me on, as a Christian and as someone who's Jewish, is something that we do and that the kids have come to cherish. And we eat apples and honey on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and we light my grandmother's menorah on Hanukkah. So we have a lot of traditions around being Jewish that I want them to love and enjoy. We haven't talked as much to them yet about kind of Jewish history.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
We haven't really talked. I mean, they obviously know a lot about the Bible, and so they know about Jews in the Bible. But I was actually thinking in terms of this, and again, we're all kind of works in progress, right? Yeah. Is that my oldest daughter is probably of the age where she could read the Diary of Anne Frank. We haven't talked to them much about the Holocaust yet. It is something I want them to know about and understand, that it's a part of our family's history. I have family members that were in concentration camps, and I that's something that is a part of them too, but that isn't something that we've really gone into yet.
You didn't start that at 6?
No.
Well,
I didn't.
Our son's 5.5, so he's right about that
right
age.
Now, it's time.
No, but I also really appreciate even just what I hear you saying in that there's not like this right moment, right? That there's not, and that also if like you look back and you're like, oh, maybe we should have had that conversation with our kids. Like, it's also not too late.
Yeah.
You just do it. You just have the conversation.
Totally.
And you begin the conversation. But I know from in my experience and in our household, it also depends on the kid.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's different questions and different sensibilities and different ways you want to shepherd that forward, to not neglect it, but to be intentional and purposeful as a parent. This is one of the beauties of being a parent, right? Like, you don't have to parent all of culture and figure out what all of culture is talking about. Like, you get to parent these individuals.
While at the same time being aware of culture and being aware of the world and how things are viewed. Because sort of like what Nicole was saying about how when you have the world is going to view, when one of our kids says one day as an adult, I'm Jewish, which is true, they are instantly going to attach to that, you do not believe in Jesus. That's just like something that the culture is automatically going to assume. And there's like a correction that needs to happen. There's some finesse there. And just as how for also at the same time, when people look at our children and realize that they're black, there's a way in which also in terms of how they're looked at in the world, that's all that they're going to be is black. And that especially when it comes to, majority culture versus minority culture, the minority culture like subsumes the majority culture in terms of how someone is viewed. And it's and just we've had that talk before together, even before we had kids.
Okay, actually. Wait. Explain that. Do more than just one sentence.
Sure. Okay.
On that, because I think it's a helpful thought.
Yeah, and I think so. This is not just a black white thing or anything. This is. So I said that specifically majority culture versus minority culture. When a majority culture person marries a minority culture person, the minority culture this is sort of steeped in this thing called the one drop rule, right? Where it's just like where for black people when they were here and enslaved and when they were had children with white people, their children were always considered black because basically blackness tainted everything. So that if you had even one drop of black blood in you, it's no longer whatever. So there's this sense to which minority culture is viewed as all-consuming in terms of how one is perceived. So if a white person marries someone who is Chinese and they have a child and that child is half Chinese, they're just Chinese because look at them. That kind of thought is what I think most people, especially people in majority culture, do. Or because one person's black and one person is white and they have a child, you're always assumed, or same thing if half Hispanic, half whatever it is, and that's an important thing to realize, even though it's not actually true. You are half white and half black. You are half white and half Chinese. You are half white and half Mexican. Whatever it is important that your child that your child understands that is absolutely true, and there's no shame or judgment or anything. That's a good thing. But this is how the world is going to see you, and that's important for them to know.
And some of that is so varied because it depends on what somebody looks like, right? I mean, we have a couple of friends who are very light-skinned black people, and they have talked about being white passing and how that has affected them and how they feel guilt or shame about it. I mean, it's so complicated. And, even our three kids all have different skin colors. And so I anticipate that as they get older, people are going to have different reactions to
What
them.
are you?
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of that coming their way.
And so, I think that, again, it's just being honest and open as much as we can be with our kids about these things and not kind of shying away from messy or complicated conversations about them is one of the ways that we are kind of parsing it out as we go.
Totally. Yep. So what about ethnicities different than yours? Like, how do you talk with your kids about ethnicities that are, I mean, I think the majority, maybe not the majority. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people, not to use that word, majority, I'm using it differently, but a vast majority of the people that are going to be listening may not self-identify as either black or as Jewish,
right.
And are a very small minority are identifying as half black, half Jewish, right. Right. So when you talk about other races and ethnicities, when you try to instill in your children an appreciation for the diversity that's beyond them in the world, for the diversity that God has created in the world, how do you talk about that, or how do you do that? What does that look like?
I actually think that it's probably easier for us than it is for a family that's just one race, because of the fact our children have darker skinned aunties who they see. Here's two black women that are my family. They also have two light-skinned, white, Jewish grandparents, and they look at them and say, that's my family. So from birth, you have these two different looking, different raced people from the beginning in their lives, loving on them, and just they've received and understand that love across different races. And it just, I think, naturally or instantly creates and fosters this sense of, oh, like even amidst this difference that I can see, I'm still being loved and still loving.
I also think our kids are really fortunate in the school that they go to, because literally the slogan or motto of our kids' elementary school is diversity makes the difference. And they make a big deal. And our kids are bilingual. They're learning Spanish. And so there's a large population of Spanish-speaking people in the school. And so they make a big deal about Hispanic Heritage Month. They make a big deal about Black History Month. I actually think a lot of the things our kids have learned about African American history, they've learned at school at this point. Like in terms of, they learned about, our oldest daughter was in a play about Ruby Bridges. Like they've learned a lot of things at school. And so, and they have friends who come from different races and ethnicities. So I think a lot of it is they're getting a certain amount of natural exposure. That may not always be the case, but we've been fortunate that has been instilled in them early.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's been our experience and our kids' experience as well with a number of their friends, and I think the school's been a hugely helpful component of that. And I also think that all of us sometimes don't know exactly how to. I mean, right in our family, I am probably majority German, and so is Laura, and so our kids are like, I mean, probably as far as national ethnicity, really, I mean, probably vast majority German. And as we've talked about that and talked about, some of but it's also not a huge part of our identity though, right? Like our identity is much more American, American, now I'm blanking on the word, majority culture, right? American majority culture is really our culture, right? Yeah. And the kind of white American culture in that sense. But talking about other cultures, I think provides a really unique opportunity to both understand the history of that in both the difficult parts and in the beautiful parts, right? And in the powerful, I mean, I think in a fallen world, right, we have all sorts of stories of heroes and villains, and understanding that and trying to and I think one of the things I've done is tried to simply have conversations like this that also allows me to say, oh, there's celebrations, there's things that you practice that are important to you that I was never taught, never exposed to. Like what are those, and how do we appreciate them? How do we gain an appreciation for the beautiful diversity in the world?
Well, and the fact that the church that we've done the celebration of cultures, I think is one really cool way that as a church community we've tried to do that.
I've cooked bratwurst.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, no, and I think that is a way, to kind of, it's a way to show our kids like, oh my goodness, look, we have people at our church who come from all of these different countries, or they have background from all these different countries, and here's, I mean, look, food is a great equalizer. Like I think we all like to eat, and I think that's a way as well.
I think there's this sense though. There's a sense of that. I'm extrapolating, but I think or positing this, but I think I'm right. Is that for a lot of the time it's for majority culture people looking at minority cultures and saying, oh wow, you come from here. This is something of you. Oh, how cool for you, as majority culture sort of stands back, sort of removed from it. which then sadly leads to all sorts of wrong thinking and wrong. I mean, that's part of what white supremacy is this like, I mean, at its extreme, it leads to that, but it's just like white people are different, like, and white people can only look from afar at other while they stand over here in the standard, normal, regular kind of thing. And it's just like, that's not the way in which anyone should be, I think, approaching this. Because I think celebration culture is a great thing. It's just like where you're from. Like, you get to take part as well. So it's just like, not yay white, not yay American culture, but yay Germany, or yay, bratwurst, or yay whatever it is. And that's why we have, St. Patrick's Day parade, and
yay,
we have
Nebraska,
Italian
and
celebrations,
my
whatever.
casserole.
All these,
Yeah.
Like,
But I also think it's hard because I think, honestly, like, a lot of my friends who are white, married to somebody who's white, are struggling with trying to figure out what their role should be in appreciating diversity, because there is a sense to which they feel like, I don't know how to enter in. And I think people are also really afraid of being accused of, like, cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense of like, well, gosh, if we decide we want to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, and obviously Cinco de Mayo has a lot of its own issues in terms of how it's celebrated, but like, is that not for us, And I think that there are some people who would say, you're right, it's not for you. And so I think I just think we have to have so much grace for each other on this stuff, because I think so much of it is where your heart is and where you're coming from. Like, if you want to enter into something and understand it and be a part of it, and you're coming from it in that way, awesome. Like, but I think that's tricky.
So, okay. So this point of grace, I think, is so important. And I think is where because I think, I guess my question is, how do we help our kids not simply buy in to the world's version of multiculturalism, right? That if we can all be in the same schools and we can all be in the same place, like, then all the prejudice, right? All the racism, all the discrimination, like, it's all just going to go away if when we recognize the fact that what's got us into this place, what's gotten us here is, some grace from the Lord, and also a lot of fallenness on people's parts. And the way out isn't like just a different version of fallenness, right? Like, the way forward isn't just now I think the world provides some opportunities that are really helpful, and that opportunities for conversation. But how do we not just have the conversation the world's having, and have it with a unique hope for unity through the gospel, with a unique appreciation for diversity, for God's hand in the multi-giftedness, multi-ethnic, multi-generational nature of the body, and of the gospel at the core of that. Like, what does that look like? How do we help our kids to see that as a uniquely gospel-centered conversation, not just parroting?
I think the first two things that came to mind immediately, and it really it's Revelation 5 of, there being every tongue, tribe, people, and nation, and that if meditating on the fact that God's plan for eternity future, for the rest of time, is for the joining together from all different kinds of people from all over the world, all praising God together as his family. So thinking about that, and the other is Philippians 2 of thinking of others as more significant than yourself. And that verse is just really, in the past few months, even few years, really has just really hammered home. Like, I feel like so often we view that verse as hyperbole and as something that's like a nice thought, but like, no, but because of Jesus, because of the truth of the gospel, we have the ability to actually do that. And I think that, true racial harmony and racial, or all these sorts of topics and things we're talking about, like, and have that look in a way that's different from the world, is absolutely steeped in what Christ has done and what Christ has what Christ has made us, and that kind of freedom and love that can be expressed when we truly, like, actually think of others as more significant than ourselves, and expressing that in a way that is thoughtful and loving and intentional, is the answer.
I also think that having a biblical understanding of sin is incredibly helpful in understanding a lot of the racial tensions and racial history that exists. And I think that, I have friends who don't believe what we believe, and when their kids are like, why did a man kill another man? Like, they don't have a lot of great answers. Like, it's really hard to answer that question, and they end up basically saying, oh, well,
they have unsatisfactory
he
answers.
was a bad man, or he had, he's been really hurt, or whatever. Like, they have answers, but I feel like the biblical worldview and understanding the idea that we're all fallen, that we're all sinners, gives us a context and a way to explain to our kids prejudice and racism that is, A, it makes a lot more sense, and B, there is a solution, right, in Jesus, and so it just gives us a framework that I think makes it easier to talk about some of these things, because we don't have to pretend that the bad stuff isn't happening.
Yeah.
But we also believe that there's hope.
Yeah. I think it's so powerful, because and by that we mean that there's not just hope, like, eternally, like God's going, but there's even hope in this world, right? That God is bringing his kingdom to bear, and that ultimately, and we're working towards this every tongue, tribe, nation. And so we get to experience it in part here. Yeah. In these incredible ways. And it motivates us, but it motivates us differently, because I also think that when we're shooting for the world's goals, we end up mimicking not only their goals, but we end up mimicking the world's attitudes as well. And that's where we end up we end up completely ungracious, right? Just outraged and just wanting to cancel each other, right? I mean, wanting to just because there's no grace. And if you mess up, or if you say the wrong thing, honestly, there's a part of me that even hesitates to have these conversations in a recorded way that's going to go out, because there's things I've said in the last half an hour, like ways I've put it, that I'm like, nobody says that, somebody's not gonna like that. And in part it's scary. Yeah. It's less scary that this is kind of like a family podcast. Like, this is for our church family, and I'm trusting and I'm leaning into the fact that we're different because of the gospel, not only in our goals, but that this provides an opportunity for us to move towards that, but to move towards it with grace towards one another, with forgiveness, developing a place for freedom. But that grace doesn't mean passivity. And I think that's where, there's a false dichotomy there, right? Grace doesn't mean passivity, but it invites us, or it calls us to correct one another, to point one another to truth gently, graciously, lovingly, but boldly, saying, brother, sister in Christ, like, you're missing it. Yeah. And this is what God's vision for his church, for our lives, for our hearts. Like, this is what it looks like to consider others more significant than yourselves. But we're not shooting to destroy, which I feel like that, like, the world in which we're living in is like shooting to destroy, because it just doesn't have the even categories for boldness that's attached to grace. And in Christ we have this incredible opportunity, and so we have an opportunity to model that, to teach that to our children, to engage with them in that, and also to hopefully give them a safe place to ask some of those hard questions as well, and to I mean, I have so many different examples.
And I think it's so important for parents out there, parents in an interracial marriage, parents in not interracial marriage, like single parents, and any kind of parents that you're worried about. Oh my gosh, my kids, how will I handle blank? It's so important that we remember that we need grace as parents. That because there's this temptation of just like, oh my gosh, here is this precious soul that I have to love and care for and steward and raise up in the right way. And that can be overwhelming, and it is, and it should be. But for the grace of God that we go, and He's with us, and we're gonna mess up. There's gonna be some ways in which we don't get it quite right, but there's grace, and that's so desperately important to remember as we navigate difficult topics like this.
And I mean, I feel too like I want to remember that for my parents. Like there's ways the Lord's redeeming the things that they taught me that were good, and the things that they taught me that weren't. And not demonize them. Also not just say it's okay. And carry it on, but we're freed to do that because of the gospel. The justice has been satisfied. We don't have to try to mete it out in our messy, imperfect way, but we can strive for it, right? Strive for justice, strive for in our lives, in our relationships, in our world. So okay. We can talk about this all day, but just as we wrap up, any specific or practical resources, particular resources you found helpful in having these conversations with your kids?
So I saw this question before this, and I laughed because it's something that, especially right now, people are like, there's all these lists of like all these things that everybody should be exposing themselves to or exposing their kids to. And I sort of had to like double check myself and be like, are we bad parents? Because like we don't have a single book about Harriet Tubman in our house. Like we like there's been a lot of things where I'm like, oh gosh, like have we not done a good enough job about having resources for our own kids in their lives? And then again, I had to be like, here's the thing. My girls have really, really curly biracial hair. And when they were little, I bought this book called Penny and the Magic Puffballs, all about this little girl who goes to school and her friends who have straight hair, who are white, are wearing these headbands, and she wants to wear a headband. She comes home and her mom's like, oh, well, your hair won't work quite like that, but we're going to do these magic puffballs. And they're these like little puffs and they're so cute. And then she has this amazing day because her puffballs are magic. And it's this great book. And it was so great for my girls to read it at a time when they were kind of seeing that their hair was different from other people's. And, when we were buying, we bought them these dolls that are basically like American Girl dolls, but we bought ones that look like each of them, that have naturally curly hair that you can style and whatever. And I sought those out because I wanted them to not just have white dolls. I wanted them to have dolls that look like them. And I was talking to a friend about this, and she was saying, it's important, because I was like, well, I would do that for my girls, but I don't know what I would say to somebody, who doesn't have Black or biracial kids. And she was like, well, why wouldn't they have that book? There's books and resources just where the protagonists look different. Like maybe my kid should have a book where there's a kid in a wheelchair, not because any of my kids are in a wheelchair, but because, and not the book that's all about the kid being in the wheelchair, right? Yeah. But just that, this kid happens to be in a wheelchair, and that's a part of their experience. And I think that's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like, as parents and as librarians and as teachers, like we should have books on our shelves that it's not just like all the books have white kids, and then there's those couple books about Black history, right? I think that's sort of the direction I'm thinking in terms of where I want to go with my kids, of just making it normal that there are protagonists that don't look like my kids in books, or in movies that we watch, or in things that we experience, or in the dolls or whatever. So that we're just kind of encouraging diversity in ways that don't just have to be about civil rights, but can also just be about there's a lot of different people with a lot of different cultures and ethnicities, and we want to have excited curiosity to get to know about other people who are different than us and understand their challenges and their triumphs, and just make it more about that than it is about like, oh, I've got to check off all the things on this list and make sure that my kids know this stuff,
and,
you know?
And not to get pastory, but the best book really is going to be the Bible. It really is. Like, yeah, I mean, that sounds like, oh, yeah, oh, pastored, boom. I don't mean it in that way, but what I mean is, at the end of the day, as believers, our job is to progressively grow more and more into the image of Jesus Christ, is to be sanctified, is to grow in our faith. And the way in which that happens is a very real, practical, boots on the ground kind of thing. It's not theoretical. It's not academic. It's, and it is those things, but it's everything. It's like Jesus says, take up your cross daily and follow me, that you deny yourself. Like, you put it all down, you give it all to him. And if that's the case, then that's going to affect your everything. So not that a very well-researched and documented book that talks about these things is bad. Please do not hear me saying that. That's great, but you don't need that. That shouldn't be your focus or what you're leaning on to get the answer. Like, what's the right answer? I want to make sure I'm like, what is the book that? It's not what that book says. That's not the book we're basing what we do on. So find a book that works for you. That's cool if you go that route. But I feel like the things Nicole was saying, it's just like, there's just that practical thing of just like, your kids read books, right? Just in general, like maybe have a decent number of them be with people of other races. Like, that's a very simple way of a simple and practical way of viewing others as more significant than yourself.
You guys are so great. I mean, this is why I wanted to talk to you. Because I think it's. I mean, in one sense, I don't even think I realized how I felt the pressure that, like, honestly, like, that's relieving to hear. Like, it genuinely is, and not because, like, oh, okay, I don't need to do as much, or I didn't, like, in some ways what you just said is more work, not less. Like, it's not just like, oh, find this list, jump on Amazon, buy the 5 books, and then you're done, right? Like, it's an engaged, relational, season by season, moment by moment, kid by kid process. But what I also hear you saying is, like, you're not a negligent or racist parent if you don't buy all 5 of these books and make sure your kids read them, because because this is a journey. This is a continuing journey we need to be on. We need to be growing and learning and discovering and wrestling and praying and we just need to walk that journey with our kids, so much more than
and pace yourself. Like, I think again, like, I think right now a lot of people are realizing that they haven't thought enough about race and ethnicity, and so they're trying to, like, catch up, and we're gonna burn out if we do that. Like, I don't think that, I think it's important to not be passive, and I think it's important not to, be really passionate about this week and then next week forget about it. But I do think there's a sense of, like, especially with raising children, there are a lot of days and a lot of moments, and every day and every moment is not gonna have to be about these topics. It shouldn't be. It should be. I mean, I bring it back to the thing I said about sort of the sex conversation, right? This should just be something that kind of comes up when it comes up, and it ebbs and flows. Sorry, I just moved my face away from the microphone. I don't know how to do this. And, I think it just has to be something that is a part of your life. And if it isn't an organic part of your life, I think it's important to figure out ways to make it a part of your life. But I don't think it shouldn't be a source of, like, enormous parenting stress.
Well, thank you guys so much for this. Thanks for taking the time. I know that I really appreciate it. I'm really encouraged by it. And I know that our church family was too. I mean, our church family is just so blessed to be led in so many different ways by the two of you and by your family. And so, thanks for taking the time. And thanks for listening. We will see you virtually on Sunday.